Hello everyone, Jeremy Gerard from Mythic Customs here with another one of my short customizing tutorial videos. Today I want to talk about how you can separate or pop apart Mythic Legions figures. Now this is a pretty straightforward, it's like the first thing that you learn to do when you're customizing Mythic Legions. So if you have been customizing, you probably know how to do this, you've probably done it a number of times, but the reality is there are always new collectors coming into the Mythic Legions community. They're looking for tutorials on this. They're looking for information about how they can start customizing. So even though this is very much like a Mythic Legions customizing 101 type topic, I do still think there's value in doing a video about it. And I actually do have some stuff that I'm going to offer in this video that maybe you haven't thought about, even if you have been customizing for a while and popping these apart. So the first thing just to realize is these figures are made to come apart into different pieces. They were designed to be somewhat modular. If you know the history of the Mythic Legions line, while they are around 7-inch scale, they were originally intended to be 4-inch scale, and they were supposed to use a specific kind of joint system called like the Glio system. That joint system allows for interchangeability, allows figures to be popped apart. As the story goes, that was the plan. They were going to be smaller scale, which would have made building out armies and so forth, very easy. But because of the success of Four Horsemen Studios' Raven's Kickstarter, the Gothotropolis one that happened before Mythic Legions, that was in 7-inch scale, and because they discovered from the factory that the price point on a 4-inch figure was almost identical to a 7-inch, you obviously get more bang for your buck with this scale. So the popularity aspect and the value aspect led them to release these in the scale that we have currently, and thankfully they did. But one really cool thing is while the Glio system only works for the smaller scale figures, they were able to maintain the ability for you to separate these figures easily and really customize them in lots of cool ways. When you first get started with customizing Mythic Legions, just doing what I call pop and swap customs are how you're going to begin. You're going to be removing certain pieces and swapping them between figures. Some of these pieces are really easy to remove, like the heads, for instance. You can just pop that head right off, no problem at all. You can pop another head right on top of it. Now, in this case, removing it from the neck is a little more challenging here than just removing the head. Sometimes they come off much easier, other times you got to use a little more force. But I could just pop a new head right on top of that, no problem. Same thing with the shoulder armor. The shoulder armor that just pegs into the back here, you could swap out shoulder armor between the figures, easy peasy. Now, when you start getting into some of the other parts, they might be more challenging. The arms come out pretty easily, but like say the lower legs are a little bit harder. That's where using heat comes into play. So when you're going to use heat to separate these figures, you're talking about either hot air or hot water. Well, by hot air, I mean a hair dryer, and by hot water, I mean a mug of hot water. I prefer the hot water method myself, only because I find that I can put a number of pieces in a mug of hot water all at once, get them all nice and soft and malleable, because that's what you're doing, is you're softening the plastic so it's easier for you to remove them. I find that easier to do, more rapid, when I use a mug of hot water. The one time that I do prefer the hot air method is when I'm dealing with painted parts. And I don't mean this kind of painted. This is factory painted. I mean custom painted. So for instance, if I separate a figure and I add some paint applications to it, when I need to put those pieces back together, I tend not to want to dip those freshly painted pieces, even if they're dried, obviously they're dried, but even if they're sealed for protection, I still don't like putting them in really hot water. Hot air method, while it's slower because you can't dump a whole bunch of things in a mug all at once, it's a little more accurate. You can really control what you're doing there. I just tend to not like doing it for lots of pieces, especially little pieces, because I find they blow around the table. Even if I put them in a little box, they blow around. Try both methods, see what works best for you. But what's going to happen is once you start to heat these pieces up, you're going to be able to remove them in a variety of ways. There's a lot of pieces that come out. Actually, if you do a search engine search for how to pop apart Mythic Legions, what you're going to find is an article that I wrote for sourcehorseman.com that actually shows these figures. It kind of talks you through a lot of what I'm covering here, but it shows these figures. It actually shows a Templar like I have in my hands, totally broken apart. So you can see all the component pieces. It also shows a Goblin, so a 1.0 style and a 2.0 style, totally blown apart, so you can see what the pieces are. Again, some pieces are super easy. The arms tend to pop out very, very simply, but if you want to separate maybe the lower arm there or the hands, some of those are a little more challenging. So what I do is I get a mug. Now you can see this mug's got a giant black X on it. That lets everyone in my household know that this is not for drinking. Anything you're going to use for figure customization, you don't want to use it for food preparation as well. So have a mug, make sure it's only your mug, you're only using it for this purpose. What I do is I fill this mug about 3/4 of the way, I microwave it for 2.5 minutes. Once it comes out, I dump the parts in. Now, obviously, I'm not microwaving toys. Don't ever do that. That would be dramatically bad. I'm microwaving the water, taking it out, and then I'm putting the pieces in. To fish the pieces out, I mean, if I was doing, say, the bottom of this figure, I could just probably put him in like that. Say I was doing his lower legs, lift them out, and then separate. If I was doing these arms and I plopped them in here, obviously you're not going to reach into the hot water. Use your spoon to fish them out, but also be careful once you have them out, because there are crevices. Hot water can leak into those. As you're separating, you don't want that to come out on your hands. So just be very careful as you do this. But you can separate these figures in a variety of ways. I have a 2.0 style figure here, slightly different system, but a lot of the same component parts. Torso, waist armor, upper legs, lower legs, ankles and feet, upper arms, lower arms, gauntlets and hands, the head, the neck. All of these pieces come apart so you can mix and match. And that's a really great way to get started customizing. Just start to swap parts. Start with easy pieces like I just showed you, like the heads and the shoulder armor, but then you can upgrade to swapping out arms and swapping out lower legs and feet and things like that. If you've checked out some of my other videos, you'll even see that integrating other pieces. I did a whole video about how to use other feet from lines like Lord of the Rings to add all new feet to your Mythic Legions. Well, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to heat these feet to remove the actual foot from the ankle. Very, very useful. But beyond just separating the parts that are meant to come apart, there's some cool stuff that you can do by separating pieces on Mythic Legions with heat that aren't technically meant to come apart. So what do I mean by that? If you look at the Mythic Legions pieces, there are a number of pieces that, to make it easier to produce, even though it feels like one piece, they're actually pieces that are made up of different, they were molded separately, they were run separately at the factory and kind of glued together. Now, unlike these arms that just pop out because they're not glued in, they're just held in with the little peg into that socket. There are pieces that are glued in, but a little bit of heat will typically allow you to release that glue. So, case in point, if you're familiar with my work, you've certainly seen all of the Kitsune Fox customs that I've done. This particular figure here, this is just an elf ranger that has the Kitsune head and the Kitsune tail added. So, this particular head, all of the Mythic Legions hooded heads, the head insert is in there and it's glued in. If you heat that, you can pull that head out. It's not simple. It does take a little bit of working it out, but once you do that, what you're going to end up with is this empty hood piece. And now you can do a lot of cool stuff with that. You don't even have to use, this is, this Kitsune Fox head from Wolf King Customs. You don't even have to get a piece like this. Even say if you wanted to paint this hood. Well, painting this hood with that head inside of it is going to be very, very difficult. Because as you try to get the edges of the hood, you're going to end up hitting the face of the figure inside. If you pop that head out, now you can paint this hood and you could paint the figure's head separately, make it a lot easier on yourself before you peg it back into place. An example of that is right here. So this is a custom that I call a Fury Elf. If you look at it, if you're familiar with the Fury Clan orcs, where they painted an orc figure with red skin, at the time that was released, the Horseman actually said that the Fury Clan concept, this red skin concept, is not unique to orcs, that there are other races that are members of the Fury Clan. So I thought that was really cool, and I said, well, what would like a Fury Clan elf look like? So I took an Elf Legion builder, and what I did here to do this head, again, that helmet is so tight against that skin. If I tried to paint the red on those ears and the red on that face, if I tried to paint that without removing the helmet first, there's no way that I wouldn't get some of the bleed onto the helmet itself. So this is an example of something you can remove with heat. Now you do have to be careful. There are some really thin pieces to the sculpture, specifically the little piece that comes down over the nose, the pieces over the ears. They're glued. They're so small there's not a lot of glue holding them in place because there's not a lot of surface area. So when you heat it and you make that plastic more malleable, you can kind of peel them up and you can pull that helmet off. That totally exposes the head, allows you to paint the skin as you see here before you put that helmet back in place. Really, really cool things that you can do by removing pieces just to get at the components underneath it to allow you to paint them. Other things you can do is remove pieces and either use them elsewhere or modify the piece you have left. So this is an example. This is my Goblin Bomber. I call him Boom Boom. And if you notice that wonderful face he's got, that wonderful smirking expression, that's a King Noglin head. Now, King Noglin comes with the big crown. It's a very distinctive head. When you see it, it can't really be used as anything but King Noglin, because how many goblins are going to be running around with that big crown? I loved the head so much, I thought it was a waste that I could only use it with the crown as my King Noglin. So what I did was, once again, I used some heat, I used some hot water to make that crown malleable and pull it off. Now in this particular case, when you do pull a King Noglin crown off, there will be some divots in his head where that crown pegs and glues in. In this case, I used some epoxy sculpt to fill in those places, sanded it down a little bit, and then painted it to match the head so you wouldn't notice those gaps that are missing. But again, that's an example of something you can do. I started this video by saying, you know, this is pretty commonplace. If you've ever separated these figures, you've used heat to pop them apart. But this, once you're comfortable with that, this is when you can start doing some really cool stuff to add some more variety. Here's one last example I'll show you here. And this character here, this goblin uses a helmet that actually came off a Shadow Orc, a Gorthok figure. And I use the Shadow Orc. Realistically, any of the helmeted orc heads will do, even the one that comes with Kauros. If you have the Kauros cat figure and you have them displayed as a cat, you end up with that extra orc head that it comes with. A little bit of heat and you can remove that helmet. And you see what I did here was I just popped that helmet right on top of a Goblin Legion builder head. I actually sliced his ear off to give him a different look. But this is a great way that you can continue to build out your Goblin ranks using parts that are already in the line, maybe even parts that you have extras of. Like I just said, if you have that Kauros and you're not doing anything with the extra orc head, pop that helmet off, throw it on an extra goblin, and you've just built out some of your ranks. So really easy. If you're going to get into customizing, this is definitely something you're going to get used to. Even if you're not into customizing, this is a helpful tip, because when these figures come in, if you ever find that a joint isn't moving freely, like it's not nice and smooth, give it a little bit of heat. You know, especially if you're getting your figures, say they're getting shipped to you during the colder months of the year, or if you're in a climate where it's cold all the time. When those figures come in from the mail, that plastic being cold also means it's going to be brittle. If you pull that right out of the shipping box and start trying to move it around, you run the risk that you're going to snap that plastic. a bunch of the figures, the Mythic Legions figures that shipped in the Siege of Bjorngar wave, the ogre scale figures, those were shipping at a time around, like, what was it, February or so forth? Those were shipping at a time where it was very, very cold. And they actually put instructions in every one of the boxes that informed people that you want to heat these figures, you want to heat these joints before you start using them to prevent breakage. So even if you're not going to customize, taking out a hairdryer and hitting all of those joint areas before you start posing, never a bad idea, especially if you start posing and you feel that it's stuck. Don't force it. Forcing it breaks it. So use a little bit of heat, whether you're customizing, whether you're just posing your figures, you want to make them look good, or whether you're looking to separate pieces that technically weren't meant to be separated to come up with some really cool ideas. Thank you very much for checking this video out. If you like videos like this, let me know in the comments, give the video a like, and certainly if you're not already subscribed to the channel, do so whenever I post videos like this or I post my weekly live Mythic Legions conversation show, you'll be notified. Thank you very much for checking it out. I can't wait to see what you make.